is the Aryan problem from the perspective of textual evidence and linguistics. So this paper it expands upon certain parts of what we refer to as the A of the ABC framework, which consists of 4 chronological milestones. A is for the Aryan, B is for Bharata as in Mahabharata, as well as Buddha Gautama. C is for Chandragupta. So these papers have been presented over the past 3 years. And the choice of these milestones to us authors represents key points of divergence between what we call as the insider drishti and the outsider drishti on the chronology that these milestones represent. And for us, these are game changers in the sense that if any one of them is revisited and challenged, there is going to be ripple effect on all the other milestones that we consider as the chronological, which forms the chronological narrative. So one has seen through the course of yesterday's presentations and today's, with particular emphasis being laid on the Aryan debate as well as the River Saraswati civilization, how central portions of our historical past have been disfigured. So as authors, Ved and I examine in our present paper some of the key elements of this contentious Aryan theory, right from the semantics at play to the pivotal states which we believe underpin this entire debate. We also established the need for using multidisciplinary approach, apart from linguistics alone to address the matter. We place in a primary position indigenous sources as that which should serve as central domain data. And hence we have examined Indian canons for specific utterances of the terms Arya and Dravida. In them, we have compiled all this into data which can also serve as basis for any further research on the matter. Since Indo-European linguistics have been the primary template, so to speak, for the entire Aryan theories, we have also undertaken a purva-paksha of the principles of this particular approach, including its validity, while drawing into focus 2 recent quantitative studies on the matter. So we will be highlighting some of our ongoing studies on the matter as well at the conclusion of the presentation. Now, the semantics of the Aryan debate has great significance today, not only in showing how the chief positions of the topic have transformed over the course of several decades now, but also to show that even engaging with a scholar's position on the debate is subject to the use of right semantics. Here we have a quick example to instantiate the need to be very clear on the semantics vis-a-vis the invasions and the migrations. So we have Tony Joseph, who seems to be very popular today. His name has been taken several times. In responding to the scholar Shrikant Talageriji's recently published critique of Joseph's book Early Indians, he has tweeted that the phrase Aryan invasion doesn't appear in his book, and hence, in one swell swoop, he has dismissed Talageriji's entire critique. So the semantics of this issue is not limited to only individuals such as Joseph. Anyone using the word invasion alone while critiquing the Aryan invasion/migration into India hypothesis is regarded as polemical, distracting, and unscholarly. So thus, I think both of us believe that it would help to understand what really is the difference between the migration paradigm and the invasion paradigm. And we refer to Thomas Trotman's 2007 book, The Aryan Debate, for the same. In his own words, he says, a second notable change is a tendency among adherents of the standard view to abandon the idea of invasion in the sense of a rapid military penetration in favor of a slower, more gradual migration of Aryans into India, accompanied by warfare to be sure, but spread over a period of long time. So in Trotman's own words, warfare is central even to the migration paradigm, with the central difference only being about that of the time period. So to round up our point on semantics, even if the difference, whatever little it is, and even though the word invasion still appears in influential sources such as, let's say, the Oxford Dictionary, it might still be best to avoid using the term invasion, especially if one is critiquing the Aryan migration into India hypothesis. As far as we have seen, at least until the 18th century, there has been no dispute with the fact that the Vedas and the Sanskrit language belong to Bharat and her civilization, and have in fact constituted an inseparable part of her identity. Among all of you here, is there anybody who thinks at least until the 18th century this position was debated? I don't think so. Now, immaterial of whether it is posited as an invasion by or migration into India, what this hypothesis is underpinned constant. The consequence that the earliest form of Vedic culture and Sanskrit are not indigenous to India. So we highlight this because this often seems to be missed in the other more familiar arguments, including the forced parity between the so-called migrating Aryans and subsequent invaders of India, including the Islamic and British colonizations. So it is very, very important to be clear on this. Pursuing verifiable truth about the temporal and spatial origins of the Vedas and the Sanskrit language is not the same as claiming Indian culture is synonymous with or identical to Aryan or Sanskrit or the Vedic culture. It is not the same as denying any linguistic interactions between Sanskrit and other Indic languages. It is not claiming Sanskrit to be either superior to any other Indic language or claiming it to be the oldest. We state this emphatically, particularly in light of what is seen in Joseph's own book on page 162. He writes, first of all, Indian culture is not synonymous with or identical to Aryan or Sanskrit or Vedic culture. In our opinion, we see this as Joseph setting up an unrelated straw man. What is at stake here is not what is quoted in Joseph's words. That is certainly at least not our point. But what is truly at stake, and very importantly, as we just saw, are the temporal and spatial roots of Sanskrit and Vedas belonging to Bharata, and this is a completely legitimate question. Having clarified the semantics and understood what exactly is at stake in this debate, it should be evident why it is ironical that our own national portal of India, which receives a tremendous footfall every month, until recently as July 2017, not only carried the invasion by Aryans litany, but also more damaging statements such as what have been shown in bold. You can see that, the Aryans came into Central Europe and settled down into India, the Vedic civilization associated with the coming of Aryans, the largely accepted view that a section of Aryans reached Indian subcontinent around 2000 BC, and in fact the last one even further leading to what came to be known as Hinduism. So this was carried on our own national portal of India, let alone any book written by any other outsider. Now, why was this only until July 2017? We will come to that by the end of our talk. With the semantics and states covered, we now bring into focus the title of our presentation, which is Aryan Problem from the Perspective of Textual Evidence and Linguistics. Textual evidence and linguistics form 2 out of the 3 dimensions through which we are studying the problem. Dimension 1 deals with the approach to this debate, which has been and continues to be dominated by the domain of linguistics. If you don't want to take our word for it, you have here Stephanie Jameson, the linguist, who in her review of the Indo-Aryan controversy has insisted that though archaeology might offer ancillary evidence with regard to the Indo-Aryan question, linguistics must offer the primary evidence. And scenarios that are highly implausible or impossible from a linguistic point of view are unlikely to be correct. The end of her quote. In clear contrast, you have others like Konrad Elst, who calls pure linguistics as a fairly soft evidence, that it is not compatible with just any state of affairs in the real world history. bendable any which way, depending on personal whims, and that the discipline of linguistics can only narrow down the spectrum of possibilities. We have James Claxton, who is an authority on Indo-European linguistics, being even more blunt about the primary of linguistic data. We thought, from the linguistic data alone, without taking into account the evidence of archaeology or early texts, it is not possible to draw definite conclusions about the homeland of the speakers or of Proto-Indo-European, or even the age of the family of the language family. The Indo-European model as a model of language relationships and of linguistic descent tells us nothing certain about the origin of Indian civilization. Claxton's call for taking into account the evidence of archaeology or early texts, basically multidisciplinarity, which even General Bakshi was talking about earlier, is echoed not only by Paul Hegarty. We quote, linguistics alone cannot come to the most plausible overall scenario for the prehistory of the populations involved. That can be assessed only in light of the archaeological and genetic records and the cause and effect relationships that links them all. We also have Michael Denino, who has clearly listed at least 7 disciplines: literary, geographical, archaeological, cultural, anthropological, and genetic, astronomical, and linguistic. We have T.R.S. Prasanna, who has added mathematics and metallurgy as a part of the physical sciences to this list. In his excellent 2018 paper, he not only is clear that this debate is multidisciplinary, but he also calls for widely accepted ground rules for meaningful discussions among diverse scholars. All the more essential, having seen all the various positions that we have listened to over the past 2 days. We have archaeologists, B.B. Lal and so on, in India, who have been nearly unanimous in repeatedly reporting over the many decades now the lack of any evidence for either an invasion or a migration into India by the so-called Europeans. Now we also have archaeologists from other parts of the world who have joined this chorus. In some cases, they are even questioning the Indo-Aryan and the Indo-European construct itself. We cite here from Schaffer and Lichtenstein, who have said, indeed, the description of many contemporary scholars of a migrating or invading Aryan social group from a homeland somewhere northwest of South Asia is equivalent to an example of Anderson's imagined communities. A community of the past, which is imagined, created to justify a present identity. So the Indo-Aryan European imagined community was created by the late 19th and 20th century philological and historical scholars to justify their contemporary colonial, racial, and ethnocentric worldview backgrounds. Not only is it problematic to consider linguistics as the primary domain, but one should also keep in mind the warning issued by linguists themselves on the limitations of using the domain to arrive at either absolute chronology or definite conclusions about the PIE homeland, both based on their data and method. We have Claxton again saying, in summary, the Indo-Europeanist idea and method do not allow the question, when was PIE spoken, to be answered in any really meaningful or helpful way. From the linguistic data alone, without taking into any evidence of archaeology or early texts, it is not possible to draw definite conclusions about the homeland of the speakers or the Proto-Indo-European or even the age of the language family. The Indo-European model as a model of language relationships and of linguistic descent tells us nothing certain about the origin of the Indian civilization. He's not alone. Having considered the need for approaching the debate from multidisciplinary approach, we also believe that linguistics itself should consider, for contextual analysis as well as primary data, the colossal repository of linguistic material, especially textual, from India. And we need to re-examine the data thrown by it. So as a part of our study, we undertook a study of some of the earliest Sanskrit texts, including Rig Veda, Ramayana, Mahabharata, Brahma Purana, Skanda Purana, Natya Shastra, Manusmriti, Artha Shastra, Abhignana Shakuntalam, Kumara Sambhavam, Raghuvamsham. So across various genres, you have literature, you have everything that constitutes the central body of Indian canon. We studied them for particularly the terms Arya and Dravida to present a view of their contrast with the distortions that we now see surrounding as the key pivots of the Aryan faith. So the terms Arya, Aryan and Dravidian, we want them to be restored to their rightful frame. And as a part of this, we list and tabulate as exhaustively as we can and analyze the occurrences of this word to answer the following questions. What is the range of the meanings evident from the usage of Arya and Dravida? That's the first of our question. Is there any evidence at all for an invasion of Dravida by Arya? Is there any evidence for migration of Aryas from outside and into India? Is there any evidence for Aryas migrating into India along with Sanskrit? Is there any evidence to directly link Dravida with Bakshi? So as a part of this focus, we have come up with tables that are data rich and constitute basically a chunk of our paper. So we please refer you to that. And this is across literary journals. All of this data, we believe and hope, can serve as primary basis for other research on the matter. And our analysis is the following. Now, going back to the questions that we had raised, the answer to questions 2 through 5 are a very, very clear no. That is, we found no evidence for an invasion of Dravida by Arya. We found no evidence for a migration of Aryas from outside and into India. No evidence for Aryas migrating into India along with Sanskrit. And no evidence to directly link Dravida with Bakshi, or for that matter, in the many references to the occurrences of the terms in, let's say, Mahabharata, we were plainly led to the same conclusion. Arya as a word is used in both genders to address a person of cultural refinement and noble style. In fact, the word embodies all the beautiful, noble characteristics of man in general. And we have such beautiful expressions of it, say, in Ramayana. The term Dravida has always been used to refer to a group of people, along with other kingdoms, but never at all has one group been highlighted against any other among southern kingdoms itself, let alone any Aryan-Dravidian clash and